Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Mondays with Mooch. Thanks for checking back in. Last week, I did an episode with Mike Crenshaw, and we talked about starting out in the skinhead scene and then going to the biker scene. And today, what I wanted to talk about was the skinhead scene in Portland, Oregon. Two of the guys that I grew up with that helped start the scene in that area. So we're going to kind of get their perspective and see how things are going. So welcome to the show, Bob and Pan.
Thanks, homie.
Thanks, Bob. For sure. So I guess normally what I start out with this stuff is hearing your guys' input on what skinhead means to you. Like, how do you describe it to people that don't know? I know you guys have done it a million times and you're probably tired of saying it, but what's like your elevator pitch on what is a skinhead?
Oh God, I've described it differently over the years. You know what I mean? I think, but at the base root of it, it's a subculture, a way of life. And I think the longer you've been in, the less dominating it becomes, and just becomes more like natural. But for me, it's related to gangs, and so it's family and taking care of one another and watching each other's back. Music, fashion. When I was a kid, it was about smashing Nazis. It's had a pretty wide arc for me, but culture, fashion, way of life.
Absolutely. What do you want to add anything to that, Bob? Yeah, that's a good summary. What I'd say is basically to sort of tag along to what Pan said, it's a working class movement. I sort of saw it as originally kind of blue collar tough guys, and obviously with the sort of gang mentality, and which I grew up in. I had a lot of gang members around me as I was growing up. So to me, coming from sort of my background with my family situation, like Pan said, it was an external family unit that's what drew me to it, was that it was this big working class sort of unit that looked after its members and really just tried to have a good time.
For sure. And I think we see, back when it was originated and stuff, it was always described as a youth culture, right? But you see nowadays there's more and more people our age that are sticking to it in kind of a lifetime thing. Do you guys see that, like skinheads for life?
Yeah, I mean, it's that was kind of what I decided when I got into it. I didn't shave my head for like 5 years. I didn't shave my head for 6 months. I waited, and when I shaved my head, I knew it was going to be for the rest of my life. I think that it really was a youth culture when it first started, even like a fashion trend, you could say. But it's evolved into something much, much, much bigger, and it's important to people. I mean, we've founded our value system upon this scene, our love of music, our relationships with our friends, with our loved ones. I think it kind of like bleeds out into every aspect of life. And so, it's just a way of life.
Absolutely. Did you guys, so, the people that have listened before and stuff knew that a lot of what we did in Rose City, and we'll get to that stuff a little bit later, but, we were anti-racist skinheads, and the fact that we fought against the neo-Nazis in our town and the Nazi skinheads. Did you guys join the skinhead scene to fight Nazis, or did that happen, as a byproduct of being a traditional skinhead?
Well, for me at least, so Pan's a little bit older than me. Pan's my brother's age. And the people my brother was friends with were all skinheads and punks. So for me, growing up, I thought that, like, I had sort of I don't know if it was a misconception, but it was at least a perspective that was sort of coming into manhood, was doing what it is that they were doing. And I sort of followed suit with that. But I think that over the years, just like what Pan said, that, originally where it's sort of, you initially have these sort of feelings, or you have a perspective that may be one thing as you sort of grow and evolve within the scene or just within your own life. Things just tend to morph and change a little bit. And, when we were younger and, we were hyper focused on, smashing Nazis, as we got older, I think that we became more of a family. Like it's, you know, these are my oldest friends, you know, like Pan is my oldest friend. Like we've been friends for 30 something years. And so like in the beginning, it was this sort of cohesive unit. And now it's like like his son calls me. Like there's real family connection here now. It's
For
not
sure.
just one thing or another. It's sort of all encompassing, I guess.
I think to answer your question, when I was coming up, there were a lot of options to fighting Nazis. There was ARA. There were a bunch of different associations and organizations that were out there in the subculture that were trying to repel the Peckerwoods. But I think that, you know, if you wanted to be a skinhead, that was something different. And for those that were sharp back in the day, and then maybe later, whatever neighborhood they like came from, there was usually a reason for it. And so I think individually, we all became skinheads for our own reasons, and we're anti-racist. You know, I mean, I like to think just because we're normal fucking humans with a reasonable sense of, you know, priorities and reality. But, you know, too, it's like there was different ways of fighting Nazis. So sharp, you know, we would protest. We would protest people's places of work. We would protest, like we'd protest at their apartments or their homes, you know, try to like identify them and like put them out. And then, you know, when Rose City first started, it was just about smashing them, you know, like we just beat the shit out of them. And then later it just became more, you know, living an anti-racist lifestyle and having a scene that sort of, you know, sweated that kind of lifestyle, like where racism wasn't really allowed and it didn't really fit, was a huge form of anti-racism. You know, I mean, like we teach people by what's normal. That's how you change people. You don't change people by beating them up, though that's fun.
We get them to hide, but you might not change their opinion much for sure. Yeah, and I guess that's kind of what I was getting at. Is I think, you know, the earlier generations of skinhead, you know, you get into it because of the fashion and the culture and the brotherhood, you know, and you know the community. And then as you identify as a traditional skinhead with the roots, you know, the West Indian roots and the music and the culture, you're kind of already anti-racist, right? And then we get into you get into the 80s and the 90s, and you know these Nazis are stealing our image and our likeness, and they're stand against something we don't. And I think that's a natural evolution to start fighting them versus, you know, kind of more new era people that likely some people probably might join this movement because they're anti-racist, I guess, if that makes sense. So I guess that's kind of what I was trying to flag.
No, that's true. I mean, we often say,
a fair assumption.
or the word skinhead, you're not really a skinhead, you know, or not just politics, but anything. You know what I mean? Being anti-racist is just sort of like a human thing, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like it's just kind of realistic. I mean, I grew up with people of color. I have children that are of color. It's just like a normal thing. I mean, we all
the person, the humanity of everybody.
Yeah, it's everyone's moralities and values for sure. And then, you know, finding people with like-minded values and morality is kind of another thing that brings people together. So which one of you got into the skinhead scene first? Like, how old were you guys when you joined or when you got into it?
For sure.
First time I ever seen skinheads, I was 11 years old. It was 1983 in Portland, Oregon. But I became a skinhead in the late 80s. In the 80s, you grow up, you know, in the early 80s, skinheads were just really like a subdivision of like punk, you know what I mean? So you'd see bald-headed Dr. Martin Waring, Fred Perry, races, whatever. And then the politics kind of like exploded, you know what I'm saying? That kind of got everybody to investigate more and understand it more. And then there was a racist murder in this town and a reaction to it. And that caused more intrigue and more education. And that just sort of expanded. I found things I had in common with it, you know, things that were attachments to me, connections to my father, or just whatever. And, you know, you just roll with it. So, I mean, I think I started hanging out in 89. It wasn't long after that I shaved my head. So,
what about you, Bob? What age were you when you got into it?
So, like I was saying, my brother hung out with a lot of punks and skins, and so for me, that was I always sort of aspired to be that. When I was younger, I had like a mohawk, when I was probably pre-10.
But I would have paid.
What's that?
I said I would have paid to see that.
I think I got a picture somewhere. So I had a mohawk when I was probably pre-10. And then, as I started, like once I hit puberty essentially and, wanted to be a tough guy. Well, if you want to be a tough guy, you shave your head and you become a skinhead.
Absolutely.
And so, but that was early 90s. So I think, we started in Rose City in 94. So 92, 93. Well, Pan probably remembers a little bit better than me because I was so young, but he's got stories of bringing me into bars when.
Yeah, we got 20, 25 skinheads walking in a bar with a couple teenagers. I'm not going to say anything.
Oh, I did the same thing with you guys, just a little bit later on, but same exact thing. By the time I've been going to bars for so many years, I didn't even give a shit.
He's a fake D, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I think I had a bar tab at like 17 or something like that.
So that kind of answers the what got you guys into it. But, nowadays people can log on the internet. They can order, gear off the internet. It's pretty, yes, it's definitely a lot easier to get involved in the scene and learn about your roots and, how to dress, what music to listen to. But back then it was, who was around you and your life experiences. So how did you guys learn, like once you got into it, how did you learn more about the skinhead music or skinhead scene as far as like music and fashion?
Got the shit kicked out of me a number of times.
It was slow for me. It was real slow. Traveling, some books, Nick Knight's book, Skinhead, but really travel. I mean, because Portland, was a real sort of punk rock, hardcore kind of scene. And, I consider myself like a reggae boy. And so to understand that whole part of the scene, I had to travel and I had to see how other people dressed and what music they listened to, and get mixtapes and do all that kind of stuff. And so it was travel and a lot of hard work. I have a huge reggae collection, but I bought it while traveling. You go on eBay or Discogs now and you get a collection, you know what I mean? So it was a lot of work back in the day. And when you got stuff, you earned it. You had to work for it. It wasn't just, oh, that's what a Crombie looks like. Oh, and I can buy one here. All right, cool. It was, it was a whole different deal. You would buy the wrong jacket 3 times until you got the right jacket. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right. And I remember doing mail order stuff, I remember the very first Fred Perry, it was such a big deal to me because of I had to save up money for it. I had to do this mail order and get a money order and, mail everything out. And now, we see famous people wearing it and movie stars and everything else. But back then, it was our thing and it was hard to get.
Oh, and hunting the gear down, man. Like now you can go anywhere and get that shit. And before it was like, we'd go scour through like, you remember Value Village and Goodwill and just like picking for Fred Perry's and 3-button collar shirts, 3-finger collar shirts.
Or like stuff that like didn't quite fit, but like tailoring it so that it would fit.
Yeah.
And I think what the newer generation misses with that is we had that competition with each other, right? Like, because it was hard to get, you wanted to show it off and you wanted to have the nicer shirt than the next guy. Now stuff's the same from the same place, right? But back then, that was half the point of going to reggae night was to show off your outfit, right?
100%.
Absolutely. And dance moves and what records you had, and absolutely.
Yeah, in my, some of my other episodes and stuff, I've talked about, I really did a lot of reading. Like you said, that Nick Knight was a big one. I learned about, or read first about UPan and Skinhead Nation and Spirit of 69. But I think the traveling piece plays a lot into it too. And I think, Pan, like you traveled a lot in the earlier years, right?
I did. Just because I fished in Alaska, and so I took advantage of it. But I absolutely did, yeah.
What were some of the major cities that kind of helped shape, what you knew from Skinhead? And
early in my life, it was San Francisco because it was easy to get there, and like Seattle for that matter. But really San Francisco. And as I grew older, it was LA, New York, and then London. I spent a lot of time in London, and so that really kind of helped form my perspective, my fashion sense, my music taste. And I would bring that back to Portland. So I'd bring back clothes, I'd bring back records, I'd bring back Richard Allen books, and those were my gifts to people when I got home. So London was probably the largest influence, but the early influences were most definitely New York, LA, San Francisco, which includes Santa Cruz. Those are the big ones for me.
Were some of those cities different as far as like, was one more into fashion and one more into music? I mean, did you get different experiences from different cities?
Yeah, for sure. So like just on the West Coast, San Francisco and Santa Cruz were more fashion music based. LA was more gang based. But in saying that, there were some of the most sus dressed skinheads in LA. So it's hard, and some of the best record holders. So it's hard to kind of compare. And then New York had a pretty good, eclectic mix of it. And London was a trip because I would hang out with originals, like skinheads from 67, 68, 69, 70. Like I was hanging out with these old timers who are younger than I am now, that were around the first time. And that was a huge influence and had a huge impact on me. And we had a couple of those cats here in like Portland too. Bob knows.
Yeah, we had a lot of good people. Like in the '90s in Portland, it was. I mean, it's very nostalgic for me because I was young, and it was my youth, and in the skinhead scene, but we had Colin Marsh. I can't remember the boot boy Colin. I can't remember his last name. All the old IRA cats.
So that's a trip. When you have a town like Portland, you have a guy that lives here that was a skinhead in 67 in London, and like comes out to your reggae dances and dresses and comes out to your fucking football matches and hangs out and comes to your parties. That's a big deal.
And he's funny as fuck.
Right.
Colin Marsh was probably one of the funniest motherfuckers I ever met.
A little bit.
You remember when he ate those mushrooms and biddies?
No.
And he started headbutting everybody. He was walking around going, pins and needles, pins and needles.
I think that's another thing that's missed, in this newer generation too, is having some sort of mentor, or somebody like you said that you're learning directly from. They have that experience. They've been doing it before you, or from an area before you, and building that connection off of learning, and then like you said, bringing it back and then teaching other people.
Right, for sure. I mean, it's always been a mentor kind of seeing, at least where I've lived and where I've been. I always had older mentors, and then I became the older mentor, and it's sort of that passing of that torch is a real thing. I mean, not every skinhead comes from a fucked up family, but a lot of us do. And I'll tell you, probably most people in the world have some kind of dysfunction in their families, right? And so we can. But what we do, and especially Rose City, is we take care of one another. It's a family. You need rent money, boom, there it is. You need to like talk to somebody about how your girlfriend crushed your heart, boom, there it is. You know what I mean? You don't have to show that to the world, and like we'll take care of that. But we'll also like back you up, right or wrong, like public. Like you could be totally wrong. We'll back you up. We'll sort you out behind closed doors, but we'll back you up, in public. And that's a sense of like loyalty and understanding that I think a lot of people don't have, and it gives security, right?
Yeah, and that's the real brotherhood. I mean, that's a big overlap for me, is learning that from you guys, and then that's something similar that carried on into the motorcycle scene and a lot of other worlds too. But a lot of that I think foundationally is the same if you're in the right group. And then Pan, what got you into that Skinhead Nation book? Because like I said, I read a lot of those books. I remember seeing you in that book. So how did that kind of come about?
I don't really know. It's more like opportunity. I was just in the right place at the right time. Ran into George Marshall, who wrote Spirit of 69 and then the Skinhead Nation book, and did a kind of video shoot in like New York for a period of time where I was there. And we kind of clicked, talked, and I mean, I don't really know. That's all I could say. Time and place.
No, that makes sense. But I mean, that stuff like that's cool because it's lasting forever, right? I mean, those are still sought after books. They're still, highly regarded in the skinhead scene. I mean, man, I actually wish I kept my original copies because I've seen what those things are going for these days.
I've given away a few.
I bet. So earlier stuff, you guys were getting into that. Before you guys started Rose City, from what I've gathered, there was other, like you said, there was other anti-racist groups, there was other skinhead groups, right? So what was kind of that era like before Rose City started?
Well, let's talk about Rose City for like a second. When I moved to LA, I got jumped into Carson, and Carson Skinheads was a skinhead crew within LA, among many skinhead crews, all of which were anti-racist. When I moved to Portland, or moved back to Portland, I couldn't just necessarily say, here's Carson, let me jump you in. And so Carson is a mother neighborhood of Rose City. Just put that out there first off. But prior to Rose City, as far as anti-racism goes, was obviously Sharp in Portland. Prior to that was a crew called SCAR, Skinheads Committed Against Racism. And then before that, there really wasn't any group that was anti-racist. It was individuals. And when skinheads started becoming racist or picking political or race or like racial sides in the mid 80s, a lot of people disappeared, just moved on because that wasn't what they signed up for, or hung out, but just sort of hung out in the shadows and didn't become part of a crew. That's what
kind of like, there's also sort of a, like when you were in LA, Pan, I remember there was sort of this limbo in the city too, where it was like in between Sharp and in between Rose City, where there was random crews that were just sort of small and little satellite things. And prior to that, there were sort of organizations, and then there was the in between, and then we started Rose City because essentially there seemed to be there was a need for it.
So there was an in between, right? Because I guess that's kind of what I was getting at without, dropping crew names and stuff. I know, well, I just interviewed Mike, so there was a Baldy stuff going on, but there was sounded like there were several other groups in the area.
So after Sharp, go ahead.
At that time, did they all did they get along? Did they work together, or was it actually pretty separate groups, like pretty independent?
Within Portland, it was kind of like limbo, like Bob said, and just like you said. I mean, after Sharp disbanded, and really it was because we were we were picketing and we wanted to smash Nazis, or we wanted to do something different, and we were being kind of used, I think, as a political army or a political tool. But there were. So the Baldies had a huge impact within Portland. And there was a portion of Sharp so was P-U-B. And there was a portion of them that were kind of like Portland United Baldies. And then those that didn't want to take the Baldies name, not for any disrespectful reasons on any direction, whether it's Baldies to them or them to Baldies, but just sort of wanting to have their own thing. It was Portland United Brotherhood or Portland United Boot Boys. It was Pub. And then after that, there was Jason started Intensified. Is that right, Bob?
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
There were these limbo crews trying to figure it out. And when I moved back from LA, Monkey Joe, Bobo, and I were just driving home one night talking, kind of fucked up, and I was like, "Man, you all should start your own crew." And that was that. Yeah. And that shit blew the fuck up. We took all the best members from every hood and just ran with it.
Yeah, and right after that, we went over to Matt's house. Then I think we went over to Tane's.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that's something I want to jump into here in a second. But really quick, just for the viewers that don't know, I think a lot of times if you say you're an anti-racist skinhead, everyone just thinks that means Sharp. Oh, you're a Sharp because you're an anti-racist skinhead. And since you were actually involved in that, what's the difference? I mean, what's actually being in Sharp versus being an anti-racist skinhead?
Being in a nonprofit organization and being in a gang.
So Sharp was more of a political movement, right? Like you can be an anti-racist skinhead and not consider yourself a Sharp or be labeled a Sharp.
Right, for sure. And I'm not saying all Sharp chapters are nonprofit organizations, but within Portland, they got really structured, political, and kind of regulated like that. And so people didn't want that, We wanted our own thing. We didn't want to be put on a leash. We didn't want to be told when to sit and when to sit. So we did our own thing and kind of, evolved as people too, because in the early days of the political movement of anti-racism here, it was really, there were rules. There were things that we did. We picketed. We, went on marches. We did all these, things that are great to do, but for a bunch of hoodlums, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, our deal is to catch these guys on the street. Our guys is to kick them out of the show so they stop Zig Howling, Our job is to stop them beating up minorities on the corner. And we did all that. So
Yeah, and I think that's a good distinction because I often get labeled a sharp or, oh, so you are a sharp, or said, no, I was in Rose City. I was a Bovver boy. And I think that's hard for people to comprehend that aren't from that scene. So
Right.
I think that's a good distinction. So, all right. So you guys were in the car talking about doing your own thing. And it was initially, Bob, it was you and Monkey Joe and Pan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then how did it really kick off?
That's pretty much kicked off.
Yeah.
But I mean, how did you decide who else was? There was, so you guys had set the stage that there was
Oh,
several.
there was the vetting process for sure, and I think it was. So we went over to Maddie's house, Maddie P's, and then from there we went over to Tane's. And from what I remember, there was, we were all sitting around and discussing who would be acceptable and who would not be acceptable. And
yeah, we were picking the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
Were some of them in other crews or other neighborhoods at the time?
Yeah, shut some crews down.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely shut some crews down. But, it was important to kind of like bring it all back together and pick the best of the best.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, it wasn't slow. It just blew up.
Did it initially start with saying we're going to be the only group in town, or did it just kind of work into that?
Crew in town. Only Skinhead.
So
sure.
The traditional Bovver Boys Skinhead group in town.
When it started, that was the goal, right? Like it's Rose City or nothing.
Absolutely.
That was the intent. Like we had intention there, and we did everything we could to make it happen.
And we did.
Yeah, I mean, by the era I came in, that was definitely it, and there was, people had passed through or had some connections who were with us or against us, essentially. And one thing that always really stuck with me that Pan told me coming up is, we're essentially a neighborhood. The only thing that separated us from being a neighborhood is, we weren't hustling and making money for the organization or for the group. But as far as the loyalty and the territory and, everything else, we were a family and we ran like a gang.
Absolutely.
I mean, for lack of a better term, it is what it is, right?
It is.
Yeah. Sure. And with those other crews too, like a lot of the people that, the cream of the crop that we took, I mean, that wasn't just one guy and then everything shut down. There was like a lot of people that came over too. So the best of these groups came over into us. So it was, just sort of a process of elimination to kind of come to the biggest and best crew.
So the ones that held out or didn't come or weren't invited, they just fizzled out?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, they might.
they got beat up quite a bit, and then they decided not to come around. There was a lot of that back in the day. Like it seems different to me now. Like I hang out infrequently, but like what I see today, like going back to like the culture that Pan and I sort of the way we feel about the neighborhood, what we see as the neighborhood's culture, that's built from like to go out. Like you had to go to a show and seek people out and meet people. And more than likely the first or second or third time or every single time you go out until somebody decides that you're not getting your ass kicked anymore, you're getting the shit kicked out of you. And it's through that process that like now it seems a little different. It seems like people can meet up online or something. And like before there was risk of violence just by going out and seeking people out. And you didn't know anybody. So there was extreme violence. And then once you started to know people and you gained respect and things like that, like it took time, man. It took a lot of time.
The distinction too is back in the day, you're going to a show on your own. Even if you got a couple buddies, you're going to a show on your own and you're learning who's there and you're meeting them first time. And now, I could reach out to Pan online. Maybe we can start talking back and forth. And now I'm a guest of one of the members, right? Or something like that. Where back then, unless you were visiting, you weren't really anybody's guest and you were just
going to
figure it out.
Yeah, you would get checked.
Always.
There was no ifs, ands, or buts. You're getting checked.
Even bands.
Yeah, sometimes especially the fucking band.
That's true too.
I remember one time Smiley knocked out this dude that was visiting with the band, and they came down from Seattle, but the dude ended up being from New York. A couple years later, I was on tour, and this dude shows up at the tattoo shop, and he's like, we were at Hardcore Tattoo, and he's like, yeah, you remember me? I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, your homeboy came up and asked me where I was from and then beat the shit out of me. I was like, yeah, it's Portland, man. Thankfully, he took it well. We had a good time, but it kind of summed up how things rolled back then.
A little iffy there for a second for you?
Yeah, a little bit, out of town. Right. So, from the evolution of Rose City, what were some of the, big things that stand out to you guys? Some of the accomplishments as far as like, I know you guys reggae nights and soul nights. There's been bands that have come out of the group. I mean, it's a pretty legendary, well-known group. What would you guys consider some of those benchmarks?
We're still here.
Yeah.
It's still growing.
A lot of us aren't.
Right. But the neighborhood's still here. There's a legacy that lives on from everybody that's been in. I mean, there's some fun things, like if you read any old like skinhead history books, you'll realize that different towns had different fashion styles and they evolved as the years went on. So, maybe somewhere far up north would catch up to London 3 years behind or 3 years later. Portland had that own, like our own fashion sense too, which was kind of funny and cool actually. But, like the authenticity of Portland scene, and the friends that, I have from it, I think those are things that really resonate with me. It was never fake. I mean, there was a span of time that this was probably the best scene in the world. Literally,
people come from all over the world.
Bar none. And I've been all over the world, so I mean that's saying something.
Absolutely.
So there was a period of time where it was like going back in time.
What would you guys say was like the pinnacle, like that era that you said was like one of the better scenes? I mean, I know that's not going to be Rose City in general. It's probably the whole skinhead movement, right? With everything changing. But what was that era, do you guys think?
I think late 90s.
Yeah. When Biddy McGraw's was still on Hawthorne.
That's
in my mind sort of like, man, that was it. That's right. That's the spot that I hold dear to my heart. You know what I mean? Like those days. I can remember Pat, the gal who owned the place, Pat McGraw, pulling glass out of my face, hiding from the cops, pushing me out the back door. Just like that place, I don't know. It just
remember
really,
the back room they had. That was the original one, right? They had that. Cool,
yeah.
That was my spot. That was my spot.
Snug. They built us snug.
Yeah,
yeah. Little skinhead.
They keep the degenerates away from their customer base.
I remember it even had a site where you can order straight from the bar without having to go to the bar.
Right to the bar.
Yeah, because I met you guys in 96, 97, and then I didn't get jumped in until 2001. So I feel like I had some of that overlap too. Like you guys were already, yeah, and you guys were already well established and things were going good. And I was learning as you guys would already had some momentum going, but I had some good overlap there. I feel like, and I'm happy with the time I came in for sure. Yeah. So what do you guys think's different now? Not just Rose City, but just skinhead scene. I know we've talked quite a bit about it as far as like finding the gear but I mean, what's changed? Do you guys think since our era or your guys' era versus now?
I think quite a bit, but I mean, there's still a lot of people too that, like Pan and I, that I think we hold pretty traditional values as to what it is that we are and what it is that we believe. But I think just sort of going back to what I was saying before, like, at least in my perspective, I feel that things have gotten very hyper political for sure. Not that politics weren't there to begin with, but it was just different. It was a different era. And like I said before, like meeting people and actually having to like build those relationships, going record shopping, clothes shopping, like it was all, like Pam was saying, it was all effort. It all took work. And, I'm not trying to be one of those old guys that's talking about the kids these days, but it seems like, at least from what I see when I go out and kick it, it's a little different. It's a little easier, but times have changed, It's not
we grew up, and there is no tribalism anymore. There's like this sort of bleeding of subcultures into one another, and I think there's a lack of pride within specific or having a specific subculture. I think that's the biggest difference from then and now. The scene worldwide is older by far. Less and less younger people are getting into it. I mean, it's still happening, but less and less. I think those are the biggest things for me. Negatively, I guess. On the other side, bands we never thought would ever tour are touring. I've seen reggae artists that I never thought I would ever see And so there's this sort of flip side to it as people get more successful in their lives or become professionals, and they can help bring artists over or make things happen that necessarily couldn't have happened 20, 30 years ago. And so, this is a DIY subculture. And I think that's the upside of it, which is pretty awesome.
Absolutely. And those early years, if a band played in town, someone from the scene was probably the one booking it, right? Or, like remember seeing drop kicks in the basement of the Chinese tea house. But and not to name drop kick, but I'm saying, just as an example, like small shows, and what was cool about that is if you went to those shows or you helped promote those shows, you had a direct relationship with those bands. Like we became friends with bands and band members, and like you said, Pan, from traveling, and just those connections. And I think are kind of lost in this era because you got big promoters, or people are talking online, but you're not really getting that like building something together community vibe that I think we used to have.
Right. It's all online, right? So you can, which is a whole nother world too, right? So people couldn't talk shit like they can now either.
Right.
That's a whole nother deal, but yeah, for sure.
And I think culturally, one thing I've seen in the motorcycle scene and seen everywhere is in at least in my youth, I wanted to build a name for myself and for my neighborhood.
Yep.
And I don't want to live off of the name. And I feel like a lot of people nowadays want to live off of an old reputation. They want the respect of the name. They want in a club. They want the title of president. They want the respect that comes with some sort of image, but it's not their own image, and it's not something they built. And I know that sounds really bitter of me, but I've been through it. So that's what I feel like. And I think that's a big difference. Like we were trying to put the name Rose City on the map for us, not so that people would say, oh, that's Rose City, but it was for our image, if that makes sense.
Well, our deal was when your name's mentioned, the hood should be thought of.
Exactly.
When the hood's mentioned, your name should be thought of. That's how you do it. It's not about you. It's about the hood and about everybody, right? It's that whole family mentality where we're trying to push everybody forward and lift everybody up.
Yeah.
And doing that makes me stronger, making you stronger, right?
Yep.
So that was the thing. Right. For sure.
Yeah.
On the positive tip, something I've been talking about lately, and when I left the motorcycle club stuff is, like you just said, bringing brothers up, doing what's best for each other, helping see each other succeed. Rose City's done that for years. I mean, well before any of this lift train ride stuff or whatever, like, a lot of that I took off from what I learned from Rose City. So like Bob and Pan, you guys have been working out forever, right? Like when did you guys get into weightlifting?
30 years ago, something like that.
He was a pup.
Got me into it.
He was like 18 and sort of stopped going to the bar, which is also a weird statement in its own right.
Right.
Jim
I was still an evening alcoholic.
Jim to go to the bar when he was 18. And then, he's been working out a long time. I've worked out off and on most of my life, but I've done nothing but lift heavy things for a living, from fishing to packing hod to being a bricklayer to, whatever, running security at nightclubs. All I've ever done is lift heavy things, and working out.
Yeah, and the cool part of that working out part that, I keep trying to impress on everyone as far as the brotherhood building is doing it together. And there's numerous times where I'd leave work and I'd meet up with you guys and we'd work out together. I mean, pretty much anytime I hit the gym was with Bob or you or Larry. And, I see how often you and Bob are training. So just that spending time together, doing something healthy, I think goes a long way when it comes to relationship building.
Well, and like the type of conversation and the things that you can talk about, and it's just a different world when you're lifting weights. Like you're not worried about outside shit and, drama really, or, trying to fight anybody. Like you're talking shit, you're lifting weights, you're kicking it with your homies, and you're doing something that's good for yourself, you know?
For sure.
So,
sure. Yeah. You get stuck in that kind of skipping the record where you're getting loaded all the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There were years where we got in fights every night and we were getting loaded every night. And so if you can break out of that and do something productive and, like working out, which creates endorphins, eliminates depression, strengthens one's body and will, and testament to being able to do other tasks and attack other things that are like mountains in front of them that they want to accomplish. That's a good thing. That's the essence of bettering one another, right?
Yeah, that's always been my argument is tell someone, and when I was doing it for the club and telling everyone they had to work out and had a lot of pushback, like, tell me one reason you can't. What's one bad reason? Like, what, you know what I mean? It's all positive stuff, like you guys are saying. Plus, the other part, especially when we were younger, but I guess it helps now that we're older too, is, we came from a violent scene where we were fighting. And what kind of, how are you going to represent your hood and your crew and your name if you weren't in shape? You weren't doing some sort of, training for fighting or lifting or, something, right? Like,
Being physically imposing is helpful.
Yeah, I mean, recovery and especially at our age now, right? Like, I try not to get in fights anymore, but I'd like to be ready if it's going to happen,
For sure.
So one other thing that I think is good about training in general, it doesn't necessarily have to be weightlifting, but jiu-jitsu or boxing or whatever, but doing something that's sort of outside the kind of traditional, what people would think of as sort of gang kicking it, like drinking at a bar or something like that, is that eventually people sort of get to this stage in their life where maybe they don't want to go out, or they've had drug and alcohol. We've all known people like this who've had, myself included, drug and alcohol problems, where now you don't want to go out to the bars and be around wasted people. So rather than like removing yourself from the equation, well, now you guys can all still do something else. Right. Like you can still lift weights together, you can still box together, you can still do jujitsu or whatever it is, but something that's positive, that pushes people forward in a good direction and makes you feel good about yourself. I mean, there's not much better.
I think that's a really good point, because before, if you didn't have that set up and a guy's bettering himself by quitting drugs or alcohol, now he's taking himself out of the equation, and now he pretty much left the scene, right? Because if all we're
gone
at the bar, and I like going to the bar and getting fucked with my homies, and I still do it, and I think there's a piece to that too, right? As far as hanging out, getting fucked up, bullshitting together. I mean, but I think it's just a different level. I think there are different pieces of the puzzle when it comes to unity and bringing everybody together.
Yeah.
Well, the bar is where we used to always meet, right? Or in someone's backyard drinking 40s. I mean, that's where we would go. It was always about drinking. So
yeah, and the one cool thing about the skinhead scene that's really built in, or at least an active scene like Rose City and Portland, is reggae nights and soul nights. Going out and hanging out with there's music playing, we're there socially, people are dancing. It's a lot different than just going and sitting at a bar. I know there's some parallels, but I think there's more of a meaning behind it.
More interactive.
The atmosphere is different. It's not just sitting there with the purpose of getting wasted.
Right.
Like now there's reggae nights that I go to. I don't drink at all, but I still have a good time.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the one I went to with you guys last year, I think I had one drink. I mean, more, but I was driving, so. But still, you can go and do it for sure, and still keep it together, and still get that that bonding relationship that we're all looking for.
Yeah, a lot about connecting, right? So you don't see somebody for 2 weeks or a month. That's where you see them at, right? Yeah. So the reggae night or soul night or punk show, and that's where you catch up with your homies. So.
Well, and something I've been trying to push for a long time, after years of gang stuff and club stuff, is I've never wanted, like you said, you guys were going out finding people, and I don't want to say the word recruiting because the right people come to us, but you know what I'm saying? You're introducing people to a lifestyle, and I've never wanted to be that guy that said, I brought this dude around, and man, because of that, he just became a drunk or addicted to drugs or ended up in jail. I've always wanted to be I joined Rose City or I joined the motorcycle club, and it was a positive in my life. And I think those are the types of things like Pan and you guys brought about earlier, being able to openly talk about your feelings, with brothers, and being there for each other and supporting each other. And then, pushing that positive, hey, working out, or you got a job or you're paying your bills, like just the positive stuff that make you a full, a better man, and having that behind it. And that's one thing I think that's really cool that Rose City does that as well.
Not supposed to tell anybody that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that theory of being like, it's a really bad analogy, but it's like an M&M, right? Like you're hard on the outside, but soft and chewy, or sweet on the inside. It's like, we put up a front and we back that front up out in public, but behind closed doors, like this is, you can say anything to each other,
Yeah, we have that, I laugh about that with the guys sometimes, is never thought you're going to be in a circle full of alpha males and we're talking about our feelings, right? But on the flip side, when we do that, we get tighter, and I'm just going to fight extra harder for you if it came to that. Like, it makes us better men and better brothers. So it is what it is, I guess. But, otherwise I think it starts, like you said, it's a shell. It ends up being fake.
Right.
Well, what do you guys, before we wrap up real quick, I know one of the things I get a lot because of, like you said, Bob, that politics in Portland have changed a ton. It's like hyper political.
Politics internationally have changed a lot.
Absolutely, but Portland's been on a national
Yeah.
spot, right? Because of, you know, the Antifa stuff and all the marches and everything like that. How does that overlap with the skinhead scene or Rose City, or does it overlap?
With me, it doesn't.
Individual. Go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, with me, it doesn't. Like I'm a political atheist, I would say. And so for me, I just I don't get into Antifa or the Proud Boys. To me, this is just my opinion. To me, they're sort of the same thing, just sort of different sides of the coin. I like to be kind of the edge of the coin.
I think, you know, that politics, and especially with Rose City, politics are individual. You know, we're not a nationalistic gang, but there's people that are nationalistic. You know, they love the country and pro-America, and there's people that are like kind of red. You know what I mean? And so that whole spectrum gets hit. It's an individual thing. So people politically, they want. Rose City's not a political hood. You know, we're an anti-racist hood, but that's not politics. That's just humanity. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you're entitled to do what you want politically, as long as it doesn't affect everybody in a negative way. You know, you want to go represent something, cool. I mean, I think we'd have an issue if somebody was, you know, like in the Proud Boys, but I don't, you know, and I think we'd have an issue if they were, you know, in Antifa in Portland. I mean, because there's Rose City. So it's just, it's a complicated thing, but then again, it's really simple, you know. I mean, like, politics are yours, not mine.
I agree. And you touched on it earlier about, you know, the starting of Rose City and how it was back then. But even in my era, I remember that we were often, you know, too violent for ARA and, you know, all these other communities against hate. There was all these other groups that were out there that, like you said,
they were trying to take credit for shit that we did.
Yeah, they wanted to use us to an extent and take some credit. But then they also, you know, the minute there was any negative press or someone was in the hospital, then they shunned us. Right. So I think we've always kind of had that. We're anti-racist, but pushed from politics.
Right, for sure. I mean, that's what pushed me from politics.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then to wrap up, what do you guys have like going on? So Pan, you're a DJ, right? You're still actively DJing?
Yeah, I DJ monthly. I'm in a band called the Weekend Kids, a little street rock and roll. I'm just starting to DJ again nationally and probably internationally soon. The kid just graduated, going to Europe to go to college.
That's awesome.
Yeah, first
graduated with A's and B's too.
Graduated from high school. Pretty impressive. But yeah, I mean, that's just what I'm doing. Kids are all out of the house. I'm kind of in a transition, I guess. I'm a bricklayer, just slinging brick.
Does Rose City have anything big coming up? I know, you know, we've done like anniversary festivals.
Yeah, we have a 30-year anniversary coming up, and I think once that hits, and I think it's next year. It is next year. Our 30-year. We'll start doing some like big shows again, which we've done in the past. I think, you know, COVID really took a pretty big chunk out of a lot of people's finances and social lives and just the ability to actually put shit together. But we want to continue to do that. Bobby and I are kind of working back scenes on doing something else, but I mean, it's not like secret. It's just trying to put together some kind of space where we can all interact and, you know, work out or maybe run a business or something. I don't know.
Positive shit.
Yeah, I've talked to Bob a little bit about that, and that sounds really exciting. I'm looking forward to that. Other than that, Bob, what about you? I know you're not really into the DJ and stuff, but you got anything to promote or plug or anything coming up?
Lisa.Hubbard.Tattoo is a tattoo shop my wife and I own. And I personally train people. I've been a power lifter I was a power lifter until I kind of got sidelined, but I was a power lifter for about 25 years. I've also boxed for about 25 years. So I train people, and I train all the time. That's basically what I do. So I train people in the neighborhood. We try to keep it going. So,
and I'll put your guys' Instagram names in the comments below. So if anyone wants to follow them on socials, just drop down in the comments and check it out.
Cool.
Anything closing that you guys? Anything we want to say before we wrap up?
When are you coming back to Portland?
Well, it sounds like for sure next year for the 30, but I'd like to get there this year.
Well, I mean, seriously though, like all kidding aside, like, you know, if you want to come out, like, we can probably get you out here if it's
I'll come visit soon. We'll catch up. Yeah. Well, before we close, I want to shout out a rest in peace to Smiley, you know, Bolby and Tane, the brothers from the neighborhood that passed away So, keep them in our thoughts always.
Always.
Thanks, brother.
All right. Cheers, guys.
All right,
That's
guys.
it. Good to see you.
Later.